According to my next guest, Republicans are ready to restart an infrastructure initiative in 2021. Congressman Sam Graves, a Republican from Missouri and the ranking member on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, joins me now. Congressman Graves, so happy to see you. I know this is a crazy week to get time on your schedule, but I know this is a priority topic. So let me ask you.
It is a priority topic.
Let me ask you a friendly question. I've been concerned about America's infrastructure, I feel like half my life. How do we get to a point where we've got so much infrastructure and new and rebuilt infrastructure, air, transport, rail, water, that we get sick of talking about it? We've got so much of it.
I don't know if we can ever get sick of talking about it, just simply because we have to maintain what we already have, and we're still a long ways away from that point. Infrastructure is something that the government should do and should do well, whether that's maintaining and building our roads and bridges, or maintaining pipeline, a very robust pipeline structure, inland waterways, aviation, rail, you name it. And those are the traditional infrastructure items that most people think about when we talk about infrastructure in general, is the transportation of goods and services, of people across the country.
What do you think are some of the biggest priorities? I've seen you out there tweeting recently about water infrastructure, about concern about flooding in northern Missouri, and how to keep barges moving, of course roads, but also airports. If you were to prioritize, let's say, some of the three biggest items that America ought to be prioritizing in 2021, what would they be? Well,
to be honest with you, they're all important, but we put priorities based on when those reauthorizations come up, and the reauthorizations come up all the time. We obviously had highway, or the surface transportation reauthorization that we were not able to get finished this year. September 30th was the deadline, so we've extended that a year. So that's a high priority. We also have WRDA, which is a water resources bill, and basically directs or reauthorizes the programs for all of our inland waterways. That's due now, as long as we stay on track for an every two year process. And so that's something that that we've made those priorities right now. We obviously right now in the middle of this pandemic, and we've got an aviation crisis going on too. So that has to be a priority, and we need to reauthorize the Paycheck protection program for the airlines, because the last thing we want to see is that industry collapse. And this is due not to bad business decisions. This is due to something that the government has done, and is creating real problems within within aviation, at least when it comes to passenger carrying.
As you talk to your friends in the Senate on the Republican side of the aisle, are they with you on the Paycheck Protection Program? Are they with you in terms of understanding that there's another robust piece that needs to be, passed for, American business and American workers right now?
Well, yes and no. So what we have is a situation where, on something that Chairman DeFazio and myself, we put out, and something we wanted to see done as a standalone bill when it came to aviation. Unfortunately, we're seeing that added to the larger COVID or CARES Act extension or new bill that is being put out. It's being used kind of as a carrot to get a few more votes. But this is something that can't wait. It's something that can't wait for these negotiations. We've already worked out a good bill, or a good extension of the bill for the airlines, and we need to get it done. We need to get it done right away. But unfortunately, politics are playing a role in that process, and so it's kind of hung up in these negotiations when it comes to the overall COVID relief or pandemic relief. So it needs to happen. It needs to happen right away before we lose that. So all of those are priorities, but they're different. They're obviously different priorities.
I spoke recently to former Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz, who has this proposal out for an energy jobs coalition. He says, regardless of what you think about fossil energy or whatever, you got to have a mix out there. But we also have economic implosion for many Americans. And so if we can connect jobs and workers to key infrastructure that the nation may need, like, whether it's energy grid or other parts of that. And I'm just wondering, in the infrastructure area, is this another way that you can attach it to an economic revitalization program in 2021 that kind of addresses the fact that we've had, such a big hit to the economy?
Well, anytime you have an infrastructure bill, it's going to have impact when it comes to revitalization of the economy, because it is jobs and it is a government function. I mentioned earlier that infrastructure is something the government should do and should do well. And so anytime that we are putting money as whether that's a federal government or state government or even local government, those are good. Those are infrastructure dollars that are going to lead to jobs and are going to lead to economic fulfillment. And you got to remember something. In my thought process, transportation is pure commerce. Everything moves. People, goods, services, everything has to move by one transportation mode or another. In most cases, multiple transportation modes. So this is always good for the economy. It doesn't mean that we should spend frivolously, because we have to be very careful when it comes to spending those infrastructure dollars and make sure that they go as far as we can get them to go and be efficient about it. But it is a government function and something that's vitally important and does help the economy.
One of the things, Congressman, that comes up a lot when you talk about infrastructure is paying for it and how we budget it. And I know this is a perennial topic you're probably sick of, but should we consider something like capital budgeting programs rather than pay-go, trying to find offsets for every big infrastructure program? Or, I know there are also trust funds out there that are under stress as well, because the revenue sources for those trust funds aren't as robust as they might be. So is there another path that we ought to be considering on paying for long-term infrastructure, because it creates recurring returns for the economy that we're not thinking about now?
One thing in transportation is we have true trust funds, and there's still true trust funds. So all of those fuel tax dollars that are paid, they go into the highway trust fund, which pays for those projects. We have an aviation trust fund, which fuel tax dollars go into that. We have inland waterways trust fund. We have harbor maintenance trust fund. So these are true trust funds, and they need to be robust, and they need to be able to meet the needs. And that's one of the problems. You take the highway trust fund, for instance. We have more and more fuel-efficient cars on the road, which means they're buying less and less gas. We also have more and more vehicles on the road that simply don't buy gas. And so when you have a highway trust fund that is specifically funded through gas tax or fuel tax dollars, you have an entire portion of the public out there that isn't paying for any use of those highways or those bridges, which is one of the reasons why it's vitally important that we shift the dependence from fuel tax to something else. I've always proposed vehicle miles traveled because I think that's the most efficient way to do it. And I don't want to pile another tax on top of what we already have. What I want to do is completely replace, just eliminate the fuel tax altogether and go with the vehicle miles traveled, which we could implement almost immediately and pick up all of those other fuel sources that they simply aren't paying for the use of the road right now. But we have to keep up with the demand when it comes to maintenance of these vital infrastructure arteries, and that's getting more and more expensive all the time. And we haven't had an increase since the 90s for instance, in surface transportation.
Let me ask you one final question. Some years ago, I was dropping in on Brad Smith. He's the CEO, or the president, I should say, not CEO, but president of Microsoft Corporation. And that weekend morning, they were opening something called the Evergreen Point Bridge, which is the longest floating bridge in America. It's on pontoons. It's pretty cool. Yeah. And I went there, kind of ran around it. It's kind of a nifty thing. It's salmon friendly and all that. But it took $8 billion in 15 years to do it. Was the second or third largest infrastructure project in America for a long time. I had just returned from China, where I sort of felt like they were developing one of those every 2 weeks. So I guess my my crazy question to you is there something wrong with a bridge that you need between Bellevue and Seattle taking 15 years to build? Why does this stuff take so long? Is it money? Is it regulation? Because when you compare what's going on elsewhere in the world, it just seems like we're in slow motion.
It's regulation is what it is, and the amount of hoops that have to be jumped through to do a lot of these infrastructure projects, and you never see them happen on time or under budget. That's something that the president has been pushing for some time now when it comes to to highway projects, aviation projects, which I've got a bill that does just that, and it tries to incentivize early completion of these projects. But it's the regulation and these hoops that you have to jump through and the studies that have to be conducted to be able to get something done. And the longer something takes, the more money it's going to take. The more you draw it out, that's with any project. I don't care if you're building a building or a house or a new highway. The longer it takes, the more money it's going to take to get that completed. And that's a real problem. We waste so much money in this country on just, it's just delay when it comes to projects, and we just study them to death and engineer them to death for that matter as well. And when it does not have to be that way, and that a lot of that has to do with government, and government needs to streamline that process. Something we've been pushing for a long time is to eliminate so much of the burdensome regulations that it takes to do these projects, and they would be so much cheaper for the taxpayer in the long run.
Well, Representative Sam Graves of Missouri, I know you got a busy week, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us on America's infrastructure needs today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.